Let's talk about key learning points first of all. Key learning points. What's the webinar about today? We'll talk about realizing the value and of course the benefits of business continuity management and its importance for your organization. One point on that, getting your top level management to appreciate the benefits of BCM, as we'll refer to it from now on, and what the return on investment or ROI is absolutely key to embedding this in your organizations. We'll learn about the international standard, the ISO 22301-2012, best standard in business continuity, which is industry best practice. We'll understand how you can raise awareness on how to embed BCM in your organization's culture. And finally, discover the role of something called BCMS, which is Business Continuity Management System, in an organizational resilience context. Let's look first of all at some top threats for the Middle East and North Africa. I understand most people on the webinar today are from these regions, and if you're not, I'm sure you'll find these interesting and there'll be some comparison and synergy with your own risks anyway. So cyber attack, top risks, the things that people are talking about, why we have business continuity and why we have crisis management in organizations. Cyber attack you'll generally see on the top risk registers for most organizations. Your organization, of course, should always have a corporate risk register. Perhaps you have an enterprise risk management system or ERM. And you should also look at your local and international risks around this. Following cyber attack, we look at unplanned IT and telecoms outages at 47% and data breach at 44%. And there are various other risks that you'll be able to think about for your own organizations. Perhaps there'll be something in there about staff absence scenarios. And of course, business continuity management. There should be a risk in each and every organization around, there's a risk that we won't be able to deliver our key critical functions during a disruption. Of course, having an embedded BCM plan in place helps to mitigate that risk. It won't eliminate it. You can transfer some of the risks that you have with your suppliers, but the BCM will most certainly help you to mitigate this risk and to stop any of the risks becoming issues. And we'll talk today about some trends as well that we're seeing. The trends I refer to are from the Business Continuity Institute BCI Horizon Scan Report 2016, which talks about loss of key employees. Let's not think too much about the cause of loss of employees. Let's talk more about the consequence of staff absence. We'll talk about malicious internet attacks. We'll cover off some bits about reputation. And of course, political change and geopolitical stability or instability in your region. And these are all things that should be mapped at the corporate level in terms of risks. These slides I've taken from the UAE, from Abu Dhabi, and also from Dubai. UAE is United Arab Emirates. And you'll see various things on here, some of which will be obvious, some won't be obvious. So we'll look at the top left corner. Hopefully you can see my cursor. This lady here, quite often when I present, I talk about high risks and unknown risks. This lady, when you look at her, perhaps she's pretty low risk, you might consider, when in fact, in Abu Dhabi, a few years ago, she actually committed a murder. She murdered an American tourist in a shopping center in Abu Dhabi. Very, very unlikely, but try and think about the context of these types of things. UAE and many other GCC countries, we have sandstorms, we have fog, things like hacking, these are worldwide. There's occasional bad weather in the Fujairah area of the United Arab Emirates and on the Omani coast also. Staff unrest, migrant worker unrest, this is a key emerging threat also in the UAE. And if you rely on key suppliers to do critical functions for you, consider what their own resilience is. What resilience plans do they have in place when their staff don't turn up? And check your assumptions. Ask people to show you what they tell you from time to time. This will avoid you becoming unstuck in certain times. This one's slightly humorous. It's about sandstorms. denial of access to premises. This is flooding, and of course this is fire. Fire, of course, is a key risk for certain industries, especially in oil and gas. As we go along today, you'll see several slides, quite a lot of slides, quite a few imagery to get through the 40 minutes to help us give us an overview. And there'll be access to this presentation later. Typical consequences of disruption. When we get a disruption in our businesses, what types of things do we need to consider? Well, we might lose some money, some revenue, or some profits. Maybe our cash flow will be tight for a while. We haven't saved any money for a rainy day. Reputation. Business interruption insurance. Sometimes people say, well, we've got insurance, so that's all we need. We don't need to have business continuity. So whilst insurance perhaps will limit your profit reduction or loss of revenue, it won't necessarily protect your reputation to the customers, to the public. It'll stop you being embarrassed and having to go through lengthy explanations. And we'll talk about the relationship today between business continuity and something called crisis management. Bringing things back to normal can take a long time without plans in place. Maybe somebody will see you as non-professional. And perhaps you'll get fined because of some legal or regulatory compliance issue. These are all potential consequences of disruption. And there are a couple of others as you go along. Certain countries document this. If you look at the UK, they say there when large businesses, or smaller businesses, have a reputational issue or disruption without any continuity plans in place, many of these small SME businesses fail or never recover within 1, 2, 3 years because of not having plans in place. So just don't just think of business continuity in terms of large businesses. Think of it in terms of smaller businesses also. We're just going to cover risk briefly. Risk ISO 31000. Please note there that there's a new risk standard, 2015. It was 2009 formerly. Same number, but 6 years later. It's been upgraded to include various other standards. For example, the Crisis Management Standard BS 11200 2014 is now part of this, or recognized by it. ISO 22301 2012, the standard we'll talk about today, is reflected in this standard. Definition of risk from this standard, you'll see in front of you. The effect of uncertainty on objectives. What's going to happen? What are we thinking about in terms of our risks? The effect, of course, can be positive and maybe a negative deviation from what is expected. We don't want the risk to become an issue. We want to try and mitigate the risk. And that's where business continuity comes in as an enabler for that. Purpose of risk management helps us to identify the threats to your organization. Look outside and look inward. And do some environmental scanning. Look around the organization and look at what your competitors are doing also. It will help you to identify risk to your organization's assets if those threats occur. There's a mnemonic you can sometimes use to consider risk, BCM, and crisis, known as PEAR, P-E-A-R, the same as the fruit. Various definitions for this. But P, of course, relates to people. E relates to the environment, sustainability, or your corporate social responsibility program. A is for assets or buildings or equipment, and R, of course, is for reputation. Add on the bottom another C or a B, call that continuity of operations, as it's known in the States, or COOP, or business continuity. You can have this in place to mitigate the risk of disruption occurring and to limit the disruption to your business. And you'll see various things in the right-hand column in the triangle about how you document risk. I'm not going to cover that off fully today, but you'll get that to look at later. Next slide is about the benefits of risk management. Let's think about profit. Let's think about loss. Let's think about risk. And let's think about some of the benefits of risk management and the synergy and relationship to business continuity. You'll reduce the likelihood of disruption to your businesses or organizations. Perhaps you'll shorten the period of the disruption and you limit the impact. Of course, impact versus likelihood is how we plot risk in our organisations. And we'll be very interested in our key products and services. If you look from the bottom upwards, key products and services will relate to what your critical business functions are. Your critical business functions will come out of what your strategic objectives are, and of course you get your strategic objectives from the vision, mission and value of your company. Go back to what I talked about at the start, how to get the boss to buy into BCM. Talk about vision, mission and values, strategic objectives, benefits, return on investment, some examples of good and not such good practice around the world, how different key suppliers can affect this also. The slide, when you look at this slide you think, oh, it's a nice color. Well, it is. It's my brand color. Talks about business continuity. But this slide is all about thinking about, there are many causes that lead to disruption, many causes that lead to risk occurring. But I want to think more about consequences. What happens when something happens? And in business continuity terms, we look at that in terms of people. We look at that in terms of our infrastructure, loss of utilities, that might be water, electricity. We look at disruption in our supply chain to our external suppliers. Perhaps we'll mandate compliance with a BCM standard when we're issuing tenders for contract or contract renewal. We'll consider IT failures, we'll consider communications failures, and we'll look at staff absence scenarios also. What to do when we've only got a limited number of people at work in the workplace because of any disruption whatsoever. So let's think about consequence, not cause. Sometimes people say to me, Tim, what's business continuity all about? Just going to show you a quick video now. I'm hoping that the sound will work. If it doesn't, you'll hear the pictures anyway. This is called Business Continuity for Dummies. No one's a dummy. This is to get the message over sometimes when people say, what does it mean? Okay, so the video's frozen there, so we'll move on to the next slide. Most of it worked. So, business continuity to pass the test of time. I have another version of this. It's a comfort blanket. It's like a hand, the hand of God, the hand of anyone, sitting underneath a man walking across a tightrope. And we think, what's his critical function here? Well, his critical function is to get from A to B. If he gets from A to B, firstly, he lives, so he protects himself as a person. His reputation, he wants to show that he's good at what he does. So this will protect your reputation also. And as he goes along the rope, maybe he'll fall off, but there'll only be a momentary disruption to his critical activity, which is getting from one side of the rope to the other. He gets from A, he gets to B, he gets paid. People think he's a hero, perhaps. He'll get another job. His reputation will be there. He thought about the consequences of a disruption if he falls off. And of course, you can always improve your resilience a little bit more again. Maybe he could wear soft shoes, ballerina style perhaps, to wrap around that rope. Maybe he gets a bit stronger. Perhaps he puts a belt with a string or a metal clip onto the rope, so if he falls off, he can get up again. Or maybe he carries a pole. You can go on and on and on. You need to consider what are the benefits in this scenario. And the same, of course, goes for crisis management, which we'll cover a bit later. Now we get on to business continuity, the main subject of the presentation. And we're going to look at some definitions. So this definition is from ISO 22301. You can get a copy of this on the internet. This definition deciphers BC as defining the capability of an organization to continue delivery of products or services at acceptable predefined levels following a disruption. So sometimes in business continuity mode, you won't necessarily get back to 100% of operation. There'll be a slight degradation in what you're doing, but you will still be able to deliver the function. And underneath is a far more complex description of business continuity in that standard. It talks about it being holistic. What does that mean? Well, it means it covers everybody and everything. So when you look to embed BCM in your organization, somebody says to you, I don't think I do anything critical. Let's make sure that they are considered in the analysis. Because whilst those people might not do anything directly critical, perhaps there'll be a must-have activity for somebody else. Perhaps somebody will have a dependency on them to deliver their critical function at the top. An example of that, a type of organization's business or a sectional department is often IT. IT tends to be an enabler, providing must-have activities to support critical front-end activities. And your reliance on IT will be one of the questions that you go across and ask each person in your business during what's something that's called the Business Impact Analysis, the BIA. BCM will safeguard the interests of your stakeholders. Of course, it will still look after your reputation, brand, and value-adding activities. And there are other standards around the world. Another one in the United Arab Emirates, in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, where I live, where the business is based, is the National Crisis and Emergency Management Authority, NCEMA. They have this 7001 new standard 2015. There's a specification which is 7000 and a slightly different description. This standard is based on ISO 22301, the US NFPA 1600 standard, Singapore SS 560. It used to be based on the old BS 25999, which has now been replaced by ISO, and Australian and New Zealand standards. Then it's written in the context of an Arabic nation, an Arabic world. Half of it's in English, and of course half of it's in Arabic. And it's got that top level buy-in from the National Security Advisor in the UAE. UAE is one of the very few countries in the world that mandates business continuity on organizations. Not all organizations, certain ones. And we can discuss that later as perhaps as one of the answers to the questions. IT disaster recovery. Sometimes people will say business continuity is ITDR. Well, it isn't. The origins, of course, of disaster recovery, ITDR, stem back from the 1980s. Server resilience, backup servers. And in those days, perhaps the IT area of a business was considered to be the business continuity solution. Things have moved on since then. We now know that BCM relates to buildings, people, suppliers, processes, and all of the things I've already talked about. Has its own standard. What's key about this? ITDR is not business continuity. It's part of business continuity. I'm not an ITDR expert, but I deliver training and consultancy to IT companies to make them understand that better. And it's another service that I provide as well. Purpose of business continuity management. Before an incident, it will help you to reduce your risk, to stop that risk becoming an issue. During an incident, perhaps it will improve your response capability. And after, of course, make you recover more effectively, perhaps a bit quicker. And from time to time, another benefit is that you'll be better afterwards than you were before. You had a great plan in place. Your leaders were able to demonstrate their leadership with leadership and something called fellowship skills. And there are many other benefits of business continuity that we'll also cover. So, there's about 8 or 9 here. It's not an exhaustive list. There are many. It will reduce the frequency of business disruptions. and mitigate their impact when you do have something happening to your business. It will help you to integrate and align your business. Some people say that BCM is a bit like Six Sigma, Lean Six Sigma in some ways. Helps you look at where you have your resources and your assets. Do you have too many in one area? Not enough in another. Do you have single points of failure and you necessarily need everything that you have in your organization? Perhaps you can restructure. Concentrate more on your critical functions and your must-have activities. But of course, some of the nice-to-haves you have to have anyway, eventually. One of these might be non-urgent training type courses. Maybe it's marketing or maybe it's something else. Can help you deal with claims and reduce your losses. And when you do something called the Business Impact Analysis, the BIA, which is understanding the organization, it'll help you to identify what those minimum resources are. Maybe it will enhance your business model. Perhaps you can tell your customers that our company is now compliant with ISO 22301. We are a resilient organization. We won't let you down. We have a plan B. When you do business with us, we will offer resilience and be able to will provide that uptime 99.5% of the time. Your operations will get daily and your people will start to think more in a business continuity type of way. It'll be embedded in your organization, a bit like health and safety. Most of us now think in a very safe way, and that's because of HSE policies and legislation that goes back a long time. Benefits for the entire board. Let's talk about talking to the board, the general manager, the CEO. What do we want to tell them? How are we going to get their buy-in? The COO. Again, we'll say to that person, the business will be more resilient. We'll identify critical processes. We'll remove single points of failure. Maybe we don't need all the staff that we have. Or maybe we'll restructure. The IT director of courses will always be very interested in this, as will the information officer, the CIO. There'll be less. Don't forget to communicate in good times, not just in bad times, in times of disruption or crisis. Get some customers. HR directors can promote employee engagement, motivate your staff better, work better together. And don't forget, if you have a BCM role in your organization, make sure that your objectives, your annual appraisal has some SMART objectives in there, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely, that relate to your day job. Something for the business and something for you as an individual. And then finally, finance. Why is that important? Because that's where we get our resources. People, money, time, training. The right people doing the right jobs in the right place. Our performance will get better overall, we'll be more resilient. Maybe we'll make some more profit and we'll comply with legal and regulatory risks and compliance and other legal aspects of our business, depending on the nature of the business, of course. This is a slide from ISO 22301. It's a world-class BCM standard. We won't go into this in great detail today, but this can be done another day if required. It's from the British Standards Institute. It's a societal security standard. Business impact analysis, strategy, planning, exercise and testing, validation, rehearsal. There are many words for this. And then, of course, it's a system of continuous improvement. Ask yourself this. Will you target the standard? Should you follow a standard? Well, I like standards. Gives you something to follow, enables you to do a gap analysis and audit. You can do peer reviews, go outside and look at your competitors, friendly organizations, how well they do it, perhaps how well they don't. Then you can get certificated, and then you can demonstrate to the world that you're resilient and you follow the standard. And ISO standards, of course, are all over all organizations anyway in terms of quality and risk, ISO 14001, 18001, and so on. And ISO is a benchmark against continued practices, the way you already use the ISO standard. Competitive edge, enhanced compliance, as I've already said, and better corporate governance, and a global benchmark. Some countries will have their own standards where you'll need to follow those. And if you live in a country that has a national standard, based on other standards, then my advice is to follow that standard, but also look at the additionality and benefits of the ISO standards. Perhaps put those in as well. Okay, so the next slide is about scope. Everyone's in play for business continuity, and every department is covered at the analysis stage. Don't get confused. If you don't see your job or your department here, it doesn't mean you're not in play. It was just I chose to put 16 descriptions on here rather than 160. Everyone's in play at the start. Integration across the organization. We start to talk about some ISO pieces here. Cross-functional, agile, and adaptive. Reputation, we'll keep talking about this. Supply chain, information and comms, sites, facilities, infrastructure, people, money, and business partners and supply chain. All of this has to be considered when implementing business continuity or raising awareness across your organization. This will be a slide that most of you will be familiar with before, the PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. It's a system of continuous improvement known as Business Continuity Management System, BCMS. This comes out of ISO 22301 and relates loosely to this, which is the Business Continuity Institute Good Practice Guidelines, GPG'Life cycle, or the BCM wheel as it's known. Well, who does what in here? This is the first thing you tend to get asked. There are two parts here for management. One is in the middle here about policy and program management and resources and structure. And then the other one for management is around here, embedding the culture in the organizations or within the organization, raising awareness, training, workshops, webinars like this one, and so on. These are the management practices. And then there are 4 operational practices in the middle. There's understanding the organization, the business impact analysis, determining what the strategy is going to be to deliver the policy and the program, development of the plans, and then implementing the response, and finally, of course, exercise, maintaining and reviewing the plans, or validation. Some people say this is the most important part. There are many important parts, but this is most certainly one of the important parts. If you don't test and exercise your plan, rehearse it, validate it, do a drill, whatever you want to call it, you won't know that it works. And your plan will probably have some inefficiencies in it anyway. Don't try and make a massive plan at the start of a program. Start off with something small and build up the complexity over a few years. Business impact analysis. Again, this is clause 3.8 from ISO 22301. These clauses are part of a standard. ISO is also a certificated course, and I also have a PECB qualification for ISO awareness, implementing, and auditing around this stuff. It's the process of analyzing activities, what disruption might happen. And what's the BIA all about? Helps us identify all of our functions, but especially the critical functions, what happens when we lose them, and the impact of disruption over time. Emergency services, 999 call handling. My background's in law enforcement. People expect to get through when they dial 911 or 999 or whatever the number is. The disruption of impact is perhaps 10 seconds for this category. This needs to be fixed quickly so members of the public can still get through. The same with police radio systems. But perhaps training and marketing is not that important. Maybe we can go for 3-4 months before the impact is such that we'll have disruption in our business. So different types of functions have different categories in terms of disruption for the BIA. That's known as the impact of an outage over different timelines. What's the maximum acceptable outage? How long can we go along before we need to get this service back? When do we need to invoke our business continuity plans? And MAO, as it's known, used to be known as Maximum Tolerable Period of Disruption, MTPD, under the old British Standard 25999, which is now defunct and obsolete. If you have this standard in your organization, it was withdrawn in November 2012, and the BS standard was converted over by May 2014 at the latest. That's now old and defunct. Needs to be replaced with ISO or something else. It'll help you to determine your minimum resources required to recover critical functions, minimum numbers of systems, minimum numbers of people, and what those skills are. And it will help you identify your key products and services and the activities underneath that support those, the enablers, the must-have activities that make the critical functions work. And we'll look at your interdependencies and something known as intradependencies. Intradependencies, sometimes there are dependencies between different functions. Perhaps this one here has dependencies with this one, but this one also has dependencies here. Both need each other to survive. These are intradependencies. Inter is where this one over here perhaps needs this one to do the job. And external is around here. These are your suppliers. And let's think about resilience in the supply chain and why we want to mandate or look at business continuity in our supply chain. Here's a case study. We all remember Nokia, we will all remember Ericsson. There was a fire in a factory in the US. These companies relied on that factory for microchips. One didn't have any resilience at all. One of the companies failed after a few months, didn't have any backup plans. There was an assumption that the supplier of the microchips had their own resilience when they didn't. Whereas the other supplier did have a well-handled supply chain disruption policy in place. They had secondary and tertiary backup plans. Other companies offering them resilience. And again, check your resilience. I've done work recently in the GCC area with oil and gas companies where they rely on helicopters. Helicopter availability is a big issue sometimes. People haven't always got the backup helicopter, they said. And if you're in oil and gas, you rely on water for cooling, power stations. Maybe the divers that you employ to fix your pipes underground when you have disruption aren't necessarily of all the same quality or standards and able to do all of the work. Disruption can be enormous. I was working with a company in Saudi Arabia. 5-day diver disruption, pipe broken, couldn't be fixed. 250,000 Rial impact over 5 days. And there's an example of demonstrating return on investment, ROI. Management goals, again, back to the top, people at the top. They're interested in growing revenue, managing their risk, improving productivity and profitability. This source comes from Gartner, CEO study. It's a bit old now, but I think it's still valid. Roles and responsibilities. Look across this. Which role might you do? I'm not going to cover all of these, just some of them. The BCM manager here, the specialist business continuity person in your organization, responsible for coordination. Maybe it's a full-time role, or maybe it's a part-time role because you're a smaller business or that person's got other functions. This manager needs to communicate with the BCM coordinators, the functional business units. This person needs to speak to the top up here, the CEO, have a director of him that actually appoints this person, gets this person trained. The director up here says to his colleagues across here, you need to identify coordinators in your business that this person can talk to understand the business properly. Very rarely do you get managers that understand every aspect of the business, which is why you have to involve everybody. Moving to the left-hand side, top-level buy-in. You need to have a BCM steering committee that actually gives the resources out, who does what and when. They approve expenses, communication, and media and PR statements for crisis management roles also. Resources we just talked about, and that very, very important thing about top-level buy-in. Strategic support and commitment for BCM. This is another lift from the ISO standard. It talks about competence, talks about training, not necessarily the right training or the same training, rather for all people. Different types of training, whether you're at the strategic level, the tactical level, or the operational level, also known as gold, silver, and bronze in law enforcement. Raising awareness and embedding the culture of BCM, getting people to think in a resilient backup plan B type of way. And of course you'll need a roadmap. You'll need to communicate this to your employees by raising awareness. This is one of the key pieces in the standard and also in the good practice guidelines. There are many ways to raise awareness. It's not just about training. It's face-to-face briefings. You can develop intranet sites, maybe flyers, maybe posters, specialist training, computer-based training, and so on. And of course, everything needs to be documented ultimately. The strategy, the policy, the tactics needs to be kept in hard copy format, also in electronic format. And let's not forget about version control. Out-of-date versions. This can be a big issue. So one of the things you'll need to consider under documentation is a list of where your plans are, who's got them, and what version they've got. Embedding the culture in the organization. This is one of the 4 things I said we talk about today. All persons should be aware of the policy. What does it say? That policy should be somewhere in the intranet system. What their contribution is to the effectiveness of the BCMS system. Benefits, the benefits that they understand, and implications of non-conformities. This relates more to auditing of standards. Non-conformities used to be known as areas for improvement, or AFIs, under the old BS standard. And then finally, during a disruption, what's your role? What are you going to do? And sometimes there's a bit of hardship in this. Business won't be the same. Your hours might be longer. Maybe you won't see your families for a while. And different organizations have better capability in this respect than others. So there's an element of raising awareness and making sure that people understand that there'll be this hardship sometimes. Day-to-day operations should be in the core value of the organization. Where does business continuity fit in the vision, mission, and values, strategic objectives, and so on? Raising awareness in terms of education. And if you have a BCM role in your organization, whether it's full-time or part-time, make sure that that's demonstrated in staff annual appraisals. Something for the business and something for you as an individual. Perhaps there's an opportunity there to raise awareness and get buy-in to go on a training course. Or perhaps some time to do a webinar during working hours. And then finally, you need to develop a system to evaluate the effectiveness of your BCM awareness delivery. When people audit organizations, external auditors, I do this sometimes, I'll be checking awareness. Maybe you'll give me 5 people to talk to. Maybe I'll ask 2 or 3 of those 5, but I'll ask another 5 because I want to check that there's overall awareness in the organization. Exercise and testing the business continuity plan and the benefits. There are multiple benefits of exercise and testing. It raises awareness. You know that your plan works. Is it fit for purpose? Is it match fit? Have you got your maximum acceptable outage right, or your recovery time objectives known as RTOs? And do you comply with the minimum standards? And have you validated your plan? And eventually, over a long period, you need to validate the whole of your plan. Gradually build up the complexity. Maybe it's a small fire in the IT section. Don't do a small fire, add a terrorist attack, and then fly a plane into something. Because clearly, people will start just dealing with the incident and the emergency response aspects of that. That's exercise and testing. There are many different types of exercise. Review of a plan. I show you a plan. We look at it. We shake hands and you say, thank you very much. There's a tabletop exercise where I'll give you paper feeds. Inject 1, inject 2, inject 3, and so on. Building a scenario. Call trees. You can test this manually, or if you use emergency notification systems, you can check the validity of your contact lists and whether or not they're up to date. And do they work? Are the people still there in the organization? I did some work recently for an organization where I found plans going back to 2011, 2012, and half the people weren't there anymore. Well, clearly these plans won't work during a crisis or an emergency or during a business continuity type incident. And then there are more complex exercises and tests known as simulations, IT work area recovery, where you actually move your staff, and integrated exercises where you start working with other organizations, emergency services, and other providers. BCM return on investment, one to show the CEO. Big businesses sometimes can manage a crisis. They might not deal with it effectively, but they have lots of resources, lots of plans, lots of people, and they can get by, especially if they have a good brand. If your brand's not so good, perhaps the impact from the crisis will be more negative. Whereas on the right side of the scale, small to medium enterprises, SMEs, far more vulnerable. Their disruption period's a bit lower, their cash flow impacts faster, they've got limited resources. And sometimes you use this when trying to convince people in smaller enterprises that they can also have business continuity. We're coming towards the end of the presentation now. Let's not forget at the bottom about risk management and dynamic risk assessment. How that links with emergency response, that golden 10 minutes or golden 1 hour, whatever the nature of your business is, your incident, your crisis management, and of course the new kid on the block known as business continuity. I like this slide. All for one and one for all. Used to be 3 Musketeers, now it's the 4 Musketeers is the newest film. Perhaps we'll think of the 4th Musketeer as business continuity. Crisis management is about adaptability during something that spirals beyond normal incident management or BCM. Business continuity, perhaps we think about that in terms of emergency preparedness. What are we going to do? Emergency management, this is about response. And then risk management, where we're looking at interruptions to our business, trying to look in advance what might happen. And this is where we get into something called organisational resilience. That's a more complex definition of the 4 Musketeers, which we won't go through today, for you to read another day. They all have standards. They all have ISO standards. And it is fairly simple to integrate them. So where are you now in your organisations? And where do you think you want to be? How robust are your BCMS systems? And finally, how will you get there? And what might your journey be in order to get you to the end? How to pass the test of time? My suggestion, my advice is to embed business continuity in your organisations. We'll go to questions now. It's a very quick marketing slide for me here. What our business can do for you, how we can work with you at different levels, certification training, customized at the strategic, tactical, operational level. We offer services in English and also in Arabic, given that we're based in Dubai with local resources. And the company is a licensed training partner with the Business Continuity Institute, enabling us to issue or deliver in-house certified BCI, CBCI courses. And that concludes today's webinar, and thank you very much. And I'll hand over to Nida now for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tim, for a very interesting presentation. Folks, we are open for the question and answers. You can either put your question in the chat box or you can raise the hand icon available on your webinar console. So we have quite a few questions lined up. Let me go to the first question. The question is, what is the worst case scenario if a company does not have a business continuity plan in place?
Sure. Well, I think worst case scenario, and I talked about this earlier in the presentation, is, especially in the small to medium enterprises, is your business ultimately will probably fold because your reputation will be irrevocably damaged. Maybe some of your people will be injured, perhaps they'll be killed. You'll be unable to deliver your critical business functions during a disruption. There's lots of market competition around in the world. People will go from one organization, they'll just go to another organization that's more resilient. Bigger brands can get away with this sometimes. For example, Marks and Spencer's is a good brand. Waitrose is a good brand. You buy a sandwich, it's bad. They built their brand. You'll go back again and buy another sandwich there. You fly with a good airline. You get delayed like I was yesterday. But I'll still fly with the airline because they have a good brand building. But the smaller businesses, where you let a customer down, that interrupts their customers and so on, people potentially will move away from you, and ultimately your business will go bust. This is one of the key issues around embedding business continuity and the ROI in BCM. Next question.
Thank you, Mr. Tim. The next question is, what are the main job duties and responsibilities of business continuity planner?
Business continuity planning. Do we mean in terms of the roles?
He's asking what are the main job duties and responsibilities of business continuity planner employee, the employee who does all these. What are his jobs, duties, and responsibilities?
Yeah, sure. Well, of course, the business continuity manager will be, or the planner will be assigned directly by the person at the top of the organisation. This person will work very closely with the director in terms of documenting what the policy might look like. The senior person will have an idea about their vision, mission, and values, their strategic objectives, and the policy will need to reflect that. We'll need to have top-level buy-in. And the BCM manager will need to build a strategy in order to deliver that. And of course, after they've had sufficient training, they would need to be able to develop corporate templates. The BCM manager would need to do a workshop known as a strategic BIA with the very top people in the organization, look at the very, very top level activities and build those into the template. The BCM manager would then need to work out with the directors who the coordinators would be across their business, and then go and have a workshop with them, explain to them the context of business continuity, raise awareness amongst them, introduce the corporate templates, make sure people understand what they mean and what their role is in the organization, consider whether or not they need to have training, and then of course together, using the framework from the policy and the strategy, they would need to do an organizational business impact analysis, looking at each of their sections in terms of people, supply chain, IT, telecoms, third-party supplies, infrastructure, and so on. So everyone has a very important part, but the BCM manager is the person that really sits between the BCM coordinators and the person at the top of the organization that generally assigns someone at the board level or director level to manage that business continuity manager to get the work done.
Thank you, Tim. We have another one. The question is, where does IT resiliency fit into business continuity planning?
Sure. Well, IT resilience, of course, and I covered this off in the presentation, is the origin of where business continuity came from. So IT disaster recovery, IT continuity, which also has its own standard number, is a key aspect of this. And in most organizations, when you do the BIA process, you'll say to each part of the business, we've done a strategic BIA, these are what we think our critical activities are. Tell us which of those activities you do, and as part of that process, what IT systems do you need in order to deliver that front-line function, either directly or indirectly. In other words, what dependency do you have on IT and IT disaster recovery to deliver your front-end functions? This is a common question from ITDR because they often say that they're just an enabler that don't deliver anything at the front end. But there are smart organizations, there are many in the UAE, where the front end is the main core business. And of course, it's easier to demonstrate that in that area. Historically, I did this in my police career. I had 430 IT systems that people said they needed. Well, in the end, we decided that 25 were critical. And the 25 IT systems, the critical ones, those are the systems on which you base your BCM planning and your IT disaster recovery capability.
Thank you, Tim. We'll be going to the next question. The question is, what is the value of a business continuity program?
The value?
The value.
Well, of course, I mean, we talked about value quite a bit during the presentation already in terms of business benefits, brand value building. The value of BCM makes you a more resilient organization. Perhaps it makes people more likely to want to work with your organization, perhaps to work for your organization. The value, again, it protects your reputation during times of disruption or a crisis. It makes you more leaner. You do a check of what you have 40 people doing a role, maybe you only need 30. So the value there is it makes you more leaner, makes you more productive, pushes your costs down. Oil and gas companies are doing a lot of this right now. You know, oil is now $30-something a barrel, was 100. Still making the same amount of oil, but they want to reduce the costs. So looking across the organization at all of the assets, BCM will help you to identify what your critical functions are, your must-haves, your nice-to-haves. How many of the nice-to-haves do you really need to have? Or have you got people working in the wrong part of your organization where they could work somewhere else? And if you are selling a product and you have BCM in place and you decide to certify yourself against a standard, you can advertise yourself in marketing and branding as a resilient provider, a resilient company, compliant with ISO certification. And sometimes this can get you extra business. It's a topic that I cover off a lot in presentations. People often say, what about our suppliers? There's an example. Put yourself on the other side as a provider of a service or as a supplier to another business, and that's where you can get some more ROI. Very few businesses on that side can offer that resilience. Next question.
Thank you, Tim. The next question is, what do today's company really need a BCM, that is Business Continuity Plan or Management?
Do they need it?
Yeah.
Well, I guess if I had a crystal ball and I was to look at 10 businesses, and if I knew that they'd never have a disruption, they would never have a crisis or an emergency, there were no risks in their organization or outside that would ever materialize, and life was completely safe with nothing unexpected coming along and no disruptions, then I might say maybe they don't need it. But of course, in reality, life's not like that. Disruptions do happen. We get natural disasters happening. We talk about top risks. You can't stop man-made risks occurring from time to time. Maybe it's a terrorist attack. Depends on where you live. There's more likelihood of that than others. There are people trying to cyber attack or hack you all the time. The benefits of not having it, perhaps, are the more important. It's a better way of asking this. You have a disruption, you don't have BCM, you cannot supply activities. You cannot give people your products. Your reputation will be damaged. People will go to another supplier because you haven't got any business continuity, because you didn't foresaw or have the foresight to think about something that might happen in reality. So I think not to have BCM is misguided, especially in the bigger companies where reputations, of course, very, very, very important, and there's smaller companies where their resources are limited, there's lots of choice. People will just move on from your company to somewhere else because you let them down during a disruption. People aren't interested in your disruptions. They're interested in your ability to deliver front-end services seamlessly, whatever the disruption is in the background. That's the key value of business continuity.
Great. Thank you, Tim. We have another one. What are some success factors to a business continuity program?
Success factors. Yeah, sure. Well, I think increased profitability would be one. You spend X thousand pounds or dollars on a program. 2-3 years later, maybe your return on investment comes in during a disruption. So there's one on the cash profitability side. Other success factors are you have an incident, you have a disruption, you have plans in place, you protect your reputation. This is another one. Number 3, some organizations thrive after a BCM disruption or a crisis. I've worked with a bank that had more business after a disruption than they did before because they were able to identify that their systems were uptime, people would get their cash, their money was safe, They communicated in a crisis, whereas perhaps other banks didn't. After the incident, people moved from them from one side to the other. Critical success factors internally. Do people know what business continuity is? Have you really embedded it in your organization? Are you considered to be a resilient supplier? And so on. And there are probably many others that I could talk about.
Thank you, Tim.
We've got time for
yes,
two
we
more,
have.
right?
Yeah, I'm just asking the last question before we, come to an end. The question is,
okay.
How does BCM involves all the departments in the organization?
Sure. You mean, okay, I guess the question is there's two questions there. Is why does it involve, or how can it involve all the departments? Well,
I think
as I talked
trying to ask, how can it involve? I think so.
How can it involve? Well, okay, the first thing is to get top-level buy-in. So the person at the very top of the organization says or decides that they want to have business continuity in place. There's a communication element at this point. The person at the top must communicate at the board level, director level, that they're going to have business continuity in place. Now, because you've done that strategic business impact analysis, you looked at your vision, mission, and values, and your strategic objectives. On the face of it, perhaps only 2 or 3 departments out of 10 in an organization would actually deliver anything at the front end, and that would be true. But I've already talked about IT as an enabler of the critical and must-have functions. In an organization, different roles, different departments will deliver a differing number of front-end critical services. I'll give you an example. When I was in the police in London, I did a strategic BIA, came up with 13 critical activities. Some parts of the organization, perhaps the command and control function, call receipt, call dispatch, etc., delivered 10 of the 13 functions. Other departments perhaps just did 1 or 2. And then other departments didn't do any. Well, maybe there was some reorganization required there. And perhaps you'll move from people from departments that don't do anything into a department that does do something. Of course, there will be key core services that you'll keep anyway. That won't always apply. But I think the key factor here is engage all of the organization. You'll understand your organization much better afterwards. You'll understand the key dependencies, inter and intra-dependencies between the organization. You'll make your organization stronger. The BCM manager will have a really good handle on what's going on in the organization, and the coordinators will understand their dependencies. And then those key dependencies need to be reviewed from time to time. And every 3 months or so at the top board level, there needs to be a review of business continuity across the organization. If at the start you miss any department out, you go along, eventually there'll be a gap. If somebody was missed out entirely, somebody will have a dependency on part of the organization that wasn't asked if they contributed or not. And in reality, when you ask the whole organization, 90 to 95% of it will contribute to the front-end critical functions for the BCM in one way or another. The standards also say everyone's in play. No one should be missed out. If you're audited against a standard by an external auditor, that will be an error of non-conformity that you didn't include all the organization in the BIA. It's a very good question, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tim. Well, that brings us towards the end of this webinar. Any concluding remarks from your side before we end this session?
No, I don't think so. I'm very delighted to do it. I see that there are 101 attendees from around the region and the world, which is a great number. Lots of great questions, and I look forward to future interaction with the people on the webinar, directly, indirectly, as we've discussed previously, and I look forward to doing the next webinar, and we need to continue whether or not we talk about business continuity or a different topic, perhaps crisis management.
Definitely.
It's been great, and thank you. Thank you very much, Nina, for arranging everything. Yeah.
Thank you, Tim. It was lovely having you, and it was great to hear you, and the presentation was really interesting. I hope it has benefited the audience as well. So once again, I really want to thank you on behalf of Cover Business Network Training Centers for your valuable time and sharing valuable information with us. And thank you all of those who've attended this webinar. We are recording this webinar and it will be uploaded on our website. So please stay tuned to webinar.gbntc.com for updates or for downloading the soft copy of this presentation. With that, I'd like to end this webinar and you all will be automatically dismissed. Thank you very much and you all have a good day. Thank you, Mr. Tim.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.